Hello, and welcome to Miss Penny's Place. If you've been following along with us during the whole time that we've had to stay at home because of the coronavirus, you will know that this is the 21st day that we have been doing story time together. And yesterday we read a story about a little rabbit whose name was Peter. And Peter had gotten in trouble because he was disobedient, and instead of doing what he was supposed to do, to just go with his sisters and get some berries, he went into Mr. McGregor's garden, and he nearly got caught because once he got in there, he couldn't figure out how to get back out again, and the farmer, Mr. McGregor, found him. He almost was caught because his little jacket got caught in a net and he couldn't get loose. So now today, he did get out. He got home. And then when he got home, he didn't feel very good. And during the time that he was there, he had lost his shoes and his jacket, and he was just very sick when he got home because of all of the things that had happened to him. He'd gotten wet because he jumped into a watering can. It was a very bad day. And when he got home, his mom put him to bed and gave him some chamomile tea. But his sisters, who had done what they were supposed to do, had milk and had the berries and had a nice supper. But Peter had to go to bed with just some chamomile tea. Well, today we're going to read the story of his cousin, the tale of Benjamin Bunny. And we'll see what happens when Peter and his cousin get together. But before we do that, I want to tell you about something we're going to read about in the story, and that is clogs. Do you know what these are? These are wooden clogs. Listen. See, they're made of wood. And I bought these when we were visiting in Holland. You can see the word Holland written underneath there. Yeah. And it was in 1980. Gosh, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? And these are beautiful painted clogs. And the children actually wear these kinds of shoes in Holland. So do grown-ups. And they wear them in other places too. But these are wooden clogs, and we're going to hear a little bit about them in our story. So let's hear the story of The Tale of Benjamin Bunny by Beatrix Potter. One morning, a little rabbit sat on a bank. He pricked his ears and listened to the trit-trot of a pony. A gig was coming along the road. It was driven by Mr. McGregor, and beside him sat Mrs. McGregor in her best bonnet. As soon as they had passed, little Benjamin Bunny slid down into the road and set off, with a hop, skip, and a jump, to call upon his relations, who lived in the wood at the back of Mr. McGregor's garden. That wood was full of rabbit holes, and in the neatest, sandiest hole of all lived Benjamin's aunt and his cousins, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. Old Mrs. Rabbit was a widow. She earned her living by knitting rabbit wool mittens and muffetees. I once bought a pair at a bazaar. She also sold herbs and rosemary tea and rabbit tobacco, which is what we call lavender. Little Benjamin did not very much want to see his aunt. He came round the back of the fir tree and nearly tumbled upon the top of his cousin Peter. Peter was sitting by himself. He looked poorly and was dressed in a red cotton pocket handkerchief. "Peter," said little Benjamin in a whisper, "who has got your clothes?" Peter replied, "The scarecrow in Mr. McGregor's garden," and described how he had been chased about the garden and had dropped his shoes and coat. Little Benjamin sat beside his cousin and assured him that Mr. McGregor had gone out in his gig, and Mrs. McGregor also, and certainly for the day, because she was wearing her bonnet. see. Poor little Peter Rabbit having to just wrap himself up in a red handkerchief because he lost his coat and his shoes when he was being disobedient and he went to Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter said he hoped that it would rain. At this point, old Mrs. Rabbit's voice was heard inside the rabbit hall calling, "Cottontail, Cottontail, fetch some more chamomile." Peter said he thought he might feel better if he went for a walk. They went away hand in hand and got upon the flat top of the wall at the bottom of the wood. From here they looked down into Mr. McGregor's garden. Peter's coat and shoes were plainly to be seen upon the scarecrow, topped with an old tam-o'-shanter old Mr. McGregor's. Of old Mr. McGregor's. That's a hat, a kind of a hat that Mr. McGregor wore. I hope I said that right. A tam-o'-shanter. A tam-o'-shanter. We don't wear tam-o'-shanters here in South Carolina, so I'm not very familiar with that word. But it looks to me like it's like a kind of a beret. See it? I think that right there is the tam-o'-shanter. Right there. That's it. Yes, okay. Little Benjamin said, "It spoils people's clothes to squeeze under a gate. The proper way to get in is to climb down a pear tree." Peter fell down head first, but it was of no consequence, as the bed below was newly raked and quite soft. It had been sown with lettuces. They left a great many odd little footprints all over the bed, especially little Benjamin, who was wearing clogs. He was wearing clogs. So you see how it made a little funny kind of a footprint? Yes, wearing clogs. Little Benjamin said that the first thing to be done was to get back Peter's clothes in order that they might be able to use the pocket handkerchief. They took them off the scarecrow. There had been rain during the night. There was water in the shoes, and the coat was somewhat shrunk. Benjamin tried on the tam-o'-shanter, but it was too big for him. Then he suggested that they could fill the pocket handkerchief with onions as a little present for his aunt. Peter did not seem to be enjoying himself. He kept hearing noises. He was nervous. Benjamin, on the contrary, was perfectly at home and ate a lettuce leaf. He said that he was in the habit of coming to the garden with his father to get lettuces for their Sunday dinner. The name of little Benjamin's papa was old Mr. Benjamin Bunny. The lettuces certainly were very fine. Peter did not eat anything. He said he should like to go home. Presently he dropped half the onions. Peter didn't like being in the garden anymore. He wanted to just go home. Little Benjamin said that it was not possible to get back up the pear tree with a load of vegetables. He led the way boldly towards the other end of the garden. They went along a little walk on planks under a sunny red brick wall. The mice sat on their doorstep, cracking cherry stones. They winked at Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin Bunny. Presently, Peter let the pocket handkerchief go again. It's because he doesn't like to be there, sugar. They got amongst flower pots and frames and tubs. Peter heard noises worse than ever. His eyes were as big as lollipops. He was getting scared. And he was a step or two in front of his cousin when suddenly he stopped. This is what those little rabbits saw around that corner. Can you see what they saw around the corner? What was it? What was that? Ooh! Little Benjamin took one look, and then, in half a minute less than time, he hid himself and Peter and the onions underneath a large basket. The cat got up and stretched herself, and came and snipped at the basket. Perhaps she liked the smell of onions. Anyway, she sat down upon the top of the basket. She sat there for 5 hours. I cannot draw your picture of Peter and Benjamin underneath the basket, because it was quite dark, and because the smell of onions was fearful. It made Peter Rabbit and little Benjamin cry. The sun got around behind the wood, and it was quite late in the afternoon, but still the cat sat upon the basket. At length there was a pitter-patter, and some bits of mortar fell from the wall above. The cat looked up and saw old Mr. Benjamin Bunny prancing along the top of the wall on the upper terrace. He was smoking a pipe of rabbit tobacco and had a little switch in his hand. He was looking for his son. Old Mr. Bunny had no opinion whatever of cats. He took a tremendous jump off the top of the wall onto the top of the cat and cuffed it out of the basket and kicked it into the greenhouse, scratching off a handful of fur. The cat was too much surprised to scratch back. When Mr. McGregor returned about half an hour later, he observed several things which perplexed him. It looked as though some person had been walking all over the garden in a pair of clogs. Only the footmarks were too ridiculously little. Also, he could not understand how the cat could have managed to shut herself up inside the greenhouse, locking the door upon the outside. When Peter got home, his mother forgave him, because she was so glad to see that he had found his shoes and coat. Cottontail and Peter folded up the pocket handkerchief, and old Mrs. Rabbit strung up the onions and hung them from the kitchen ceiling with the bunches of herbs and the rabbit tobacco. The end. Well, it was lucky for them that old Mr. Rabbit came along and jumped on top of that cat. You know, rabbits can be fierce too. There's even a story about a fierce bad rabbit. Anyway, he managed to get that cat to go away, and Peter and Benjamin were able to get on home. But they had been disobedient again, and I'm sure that old Daddy Rabbit, old Mr. Rabbit, had something to say about that. But when they got home, Benjamin's aunt and Peter Rabbit's mom were very glad to see that Peter had his coat back, and she liked the onions that they brought them, and so she forgave Peter Rabbit for going back again to Mr. McGregor's garden. But I think he's learned his lesson, don't you? I don't think he'll be doing that again. Climbing down the pear tree, he fell out of the tree and got hurt doing that. That must not have felt very good. And then he got in trouble with his uncle, and I just don't think that he's going to be going back there again. I think he gets very nervous even thinking about going back to Mr. McGregor's garden. What do you think? You think he's going to keep going back? Do you think the lettuces and the radishes and all of those lovely things to eat are going to be tempting him so that he won't be able to resist them? Or do you think he'll be strong and disciplined and not go after them, and instead get the berries and the things that are in the wood that he can eat and not in Mr. McGregor's garden? What do you think? Well, it's been good to be with you, and I will see you again tomorrow. I want you to know something good is happening where I live in South Carolina. Our beaches are open again, Some of our stores are opened again, and some of the other outdoor places that people can go to are open again. Things are beginning to open up again. I don't know if that's true where you live. I hope it is. And if it's not, just be patient. It will happen where you live too. Things are going to get better. And in the meantime, remember, you're not alone and someone cares about you. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.